So, the Pokemon Video Game World Championships have been around since 2009, and after almost 14 years, we're getting a major shake-up to how things work in official tournament. So as of the 2023 season, all official tournaments will be played with open team sheets. So what this means is, for each round that you play, before you sit down opposite your opponent, you'll have access to almost all the info about their team, and conversely, they'll have all the info about your team as well. This means that you will already know each other's Pokemon, their abilities, their moves, their held items, and their Terra types. So the only thing that you won't have knowledge of is the actual stats of the Pokemon. So this is completely unprecedented in official play and will likely have a huge impact on how players build teams going forwards. But why has this been done? So in previous years, come tournament day, a player's team would be locked in a special battle box by tournament staff. This was to prevent any tampering of the team mid-tournament, such as changing moves or items, etc. between rounds. For some unknown reason, Scarlet and Violet do not have this battle box functionality, so knowing your opponent's team beforehand and then knowing yours, it remedies this issue of illegally changing things mid-tournament. So if your opponent's running an Indeedee and it blocks your Sleep Powder with safety goggles, but their team sheet says that it's running Psychic Seed, then you can call a judge over and they can take it from there. But depending on your own opinion, there are other pros and cons that come with this change, so let's quickly talk about those. So of course, I'll be starting with the advantages first. So from a gameplay perspective, the obvious one here is knowing your opponent's Terra types. So the whole terastallizing mechanic is quite volatile by its very nature, so being aware of what type the opposing Pokemon could turn into is a plus in a lot of players' eyes. Personally, I feel pretty neutral about this, but I can see why people are happy about knowing this information beforehand. With that said, the biggest advantage to open team sheets, in my opinion, is definitely the scouting issue. So if you're newer to VGC or you've never attended an in real life tournament, scouting is when players basically share information about their opponent's teams with their friends and give them an information advantage should said friend be matched up with that opponent in a later round. So I've been playing at official tournaments since 2014, and I can remember several times over the years where I had opponents share information about my teams, sometimes very blatantly, sometimes in front of my face. But you know, that's not to discredit anyone, because it's always been part of the game and it's been accepted as such. It's just something that you kind of have to deal with. And I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't mention that, you know, I've been over to the dark side once before as well. UK Nats in 2015, before my top 32 match. A close friend of mine had played my opponent in the Swiss rounds, and I was using a Breloom, and I knew my opponent had a Heatran, so I asked my friend what item it was holding. And it was holding safety goggles, so I knew not to attempt to spore that during the games. And that did come into play during the matches, and I ultimately won that set, but it was very tight, and you know, maybe I wouldn't have won had I not had the information and wasted a turn trying to put the Heatran to sleep. So it has always been part and parcel of the game, but it has no doubt always favoured players with larger friend groups. The more friends you have, the more likely they'll end up playing a future opponent of yours, and so information can be shared from reliable sources. Having open team sheets completely mitigates this problem and evens the playing field, which I'm all for. I think it's a huge positive for VGC in general, especially for new players, because you know they don't necessarily have these vast networks of friends and acquaintances to share information with. So yeah, I think this is a huge plus point for the advocacy of open team sheets. But that's the good. So let's talk about the potential negatives of these open team sheets. So for better or worse, open team sheets could discourage the use of tech moves that can heavily swing games in specific scenarios. So I don't mean gimmicks like Trick and Eject Button Whimsicott that we saw in last year's format with Dynamax. Think more like the 2019 World Championships, when Brandon Meckley caught out Wolfie Glick on stream with his Dragonclaw Groudon, or even the 2017 World Championship final, in which Ryota Otsubo revealed Brick Break on his Marowak to break Sam Pandelis' Aurora Veil. These were incredibly hype moments for spectators, and with open team sheets, those games would have likely played out very differently. And the same can also be said for entire teams. So at the tail end of last season, we saw the rise of the Gothitelle, Palkia, Calyrex Ice teams that were incredibly effective and placed highly at tournaments over in the US. In no small part due to the unorthodox item and move choices being used that made those teams so difficult to deal with. Even the players that built that particular archetype voiced discontent when information about their teams was being shared on Twitter, because while still difficult to play against, certain flowcharts of how the team was played became more readily identifiable once you could see the team as a whole. Is this really a bad thing though? It could be a bit of both, and it's down to personal opinion. From a spectator's point of view, I do think it is more of a disadvantage for sure. it does take away those hype moments, I think. And lastly, this point is more to do with the system as a whole. It's not necessarily to do with open team sheets, but the lack of a battle box. And that is, it opens the door for cheating. So a quick disclaimer, I don't think this would be necessarily a widespread issue, but it is still possible, especially when you consider the number of tournaments held and how many players there are around the world. So let's take Dragapult as an example. Imagine your opponent has a Dragapult on their team, and it's the fastest Pokemon in the matchup. Your fastest Pokemon is Meowscarada. So you play out your set, and maybe you win, maybe you lose, but there is no evidence of any foul play from you or your opponent. However, what you don't know is your opponent actually has two almost identical battle-ready Dragapults in their game. So one is Jolly and one is Adamant. Max speed Adamant Dragapult is actually 1 point faster than max speed Meowscarada is. And knowing this, your opponent has swapped in the Adamant one for the matchup against you, so they can benefit from the extra power while functionally having the same speed as if they would have used their Jolly one. So sure, their team sheet says that it's Jolly, but you can't verify your opponent's Pokemon's natures without physically looking at their save file and looking at the summary screen of the Pokemon on their team. Some people might argue that you should know damage calculations, but if a Pokemon's already lost health prior to taking an attack, then those calculations go out of the window anyway. And then there's defensive natures and bulky support Pokemon. You can't expect everyone to know the difference in damage that Armarouge's Armor Cannon in Sun does to, sassy or Oranguru versus a relaxed Oranguru. So again, this is not an open team sheet issue, this is purely a lack of a battle box one. And unless there's something I'm missing, I think it really does seem ripe for exploitation. We've seen something similar to this before, back in the days of X and Y, when Nugget Bridge was the primary source of VGC content outside of official tournaments. You had the Nugget Bridge Invitational, and there was a player who on stream had a Volcarona that he used in his matchup to win against his opponent, and during that set all 4 of its moves were revealed, and then later in the tournament, perhaps even the very next round, he's on stream again and his Volcarona is using Bug Buzz, which it didn't have in the previous game. So incredibly stupid and very obvious, but if players are willing to do that, if there are players out there that are willing to do that, then I'm sure there are some that would be willing to do things that are much more difficult to actually even recognize. But anyway, those are just my 2 cents on the topic. So let me know if you agree or disagree and your thoughts on this change. So I'm very interested to hear what other players think about this. Do consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next one.